So thank you. Welcome, everybody. My name is again Monica Flores. And today we're at Drupal GovCon 2021 remote. And today we'll be talking about 12 steps for a successful conversion, planning your website project. So again, I am screen sharing. And if you are having additional issues with the audio, you could try leaving and coming back. I'll be sharing on my screen. And the people in the room for what this talk is about, it does not require a deep knowledge of any of the content management systems. We'll be discussing the overall process and tips that I've learned from my work, as well as having a discussion about your specific questions. So this is primarily for those tasked with implementing a website redesign or potentially undergoing a replatforming process. Okay, so a little bit about me. I am a technical project manager. I joined the Lullabot staff in 2019, and I work as a certified Scrum Master. So I help with the development cycle, identifying requirements, assigning resources, and running the Scrums. I did learn Drupal in 2008, and prior to that, I was a web developer for many years. I like reading, hiking, baking, a little bit of acknowledgement. I am calling in today and presenting from outside of DC on Manahoic lands. And again, we do a land acknowledgement for those of you who are interested. There is a calendar where you can find your native, where you're living. Again, a recognition that a lot of, or all of the land that we live on was originally populated by the First Peoples and Native Americans. I am speaking to you also from the perspective of about 17 years in technology, and I did attend university. I am an immigrant. I am Asian. I am a woman. I'm a cisgender, heterosexual, married woman. I have 3 children, and I'm wearing a yellow shirt today with my Lullabot jacket logo. And yes, I'm very excited to talk to you again about what we've learned in our work. So about my company, we are an employee owned. We just became employee owned in January, and we're a strategy, design, and development agency. And we have built some of the household Drupal sites that you'll have seen. And we've been working on Drupal from very early on. So you can look at us at lullabot.com, and we're also helping to sponsor Drupal GovCon this year. So I would like to learn from the people in the room, or if you are visiting or listening in, a little bit about you. One thing that is helpful is to share your pronouns. That's just always great to share what you expect and encourage other people to call you by. So it's also possible for you to use the little button in the top right with your picture or avatar. You can actually change your name to include your pronouns. As mentioned, you can always think about land acknowledgement, or you could drop into the chat where you're coming from. And then if you are also able to, please do drop in your current role. So maybe Anna, can you take it away and see if we can put stuff into the chat for everyone? And these are the 12 steps for those of you who are interested on this process. I've encapsulated these into a blog post on our Lullabot blog. Thanks, Alex. And I will give people 1 minute to review, because sometimes our listeners prefer to read. All right. So I'm asking folks to just take a look and orient yourself. Hello, welcome, Kira. Hello, Alex. It's great to have you join us. Nova, DMV, bring those zebras home. So these are the 12 steps that we'll be going over slide by slide First, bringing together the core team. Second, establishing guidelines for how to work together. Third, understanding and aligning around your big picture goals. Four, defining the MVP, the minimum viable product. Five, identifying your content types, your user roles, your permissions. Six, taxonomies, categories, and classifications. Seven, how do you define success? Eight, your RFP and the process. Nine, vetting and reviewing your vendor submissions as a group. 10, kicking off with your chosen vendor or internally. 11, your plan for migrations. And 12, scheduling the build out. So as we're here today, just take a moment to identify where you think you are and identify what are some of the questions you currently have. Maybe jot them down, put them into the chat, and let's get into it. So bringing the core team together, you typically think of the redesign process as a collaborative process. And part of our experience has been that you need every stakeholder to feel like they can be a part of the discussion. They may not have responsibility or approval, but everybody likes to have a voice. And so you may have IT in your room. You may also have your website editors, your content editors. You may have people who are responsible for publications, maybe white papers or reports. You may have your department heads. But typically, you're going to bring together, identify the core stakeholders who are going to be in the team that helps with the decision-making process and interfaces with the web process directly. And this team will both solicit opinions and advice from the external community, and then they'll also attempt to push out information, advice, timelines, and checkpoints for the actual web development process. So try in your process to bring together, identify diverse people, different backgrounds, content, tech, editing, images, graphics, reporting. Nice to have you join us, Robert. Thanks. And then when you bring that together, you will have a better outcome when you have that type of differences of opinion in the room. Once you've gotten together, you will want to determine a time frame, a timeline that works for folks. What we've seen work well is, say, a bi-weekly meeting to start and calendar it. Find a time that works for everybody in the team, and then organize around a Zoom call, a Google Hangout, whatever works, Trello board. Start capturing the information so that people jumping in asynchronously can access the decisions made, as well as find an ongoing list of notes of how this work has progressed. This team will now come up with a collaborative or authoritative, whichever way your group prefers, have a process for identifying the who, the what, the where, the when, and the how of the redesign. And what I have found is as you get closer and closer into the planning process and more into the weeds, you may want to have that bi-weekly move to a weekly or maybe even more frequent during the build out. It's also important for you to determine that RACI decision-making matrix. If somebody is thinking that they have the approval, but somebody else is thinking they have the approval, that can be very confusing internally. So determine that who has the ultimate ownership over which piece. Determine that in advance and mark it on your screen. Here's a quote that we received from a participant in a process like this. I'll let people read it. So this is shared. The idea at the heart of it all is this is very important and widespread information that we're attempting to put a process onto. So whatever you can to allow that process to evolve over time and have a record, a chain of all of the events and decisions that have come to play. In this case, they put it in Jira. You could use whichever tool works best for you, but record your meetings or record the minutes and the decisions made, and then assign any action items so people know what to do, and then have a clear understanding of where they are in the process. And again, for those of you joining, I will be sharing these slides and I will be sharing the link to the blog post that goes into much more detail on this from our Lullabot blog. Next, understanding and aligning around goals. Wow, if you don't know where you're headed, then how will you know if you even received the correct end goal? So the process of when you're replatforming, so for example, you're taking potentially HTML sites or any kind of other sites and you're reconfiguring them, reunifying them. Potentially you're taking a base model and allowing all of the different departments or organizations to work together on it. The pain of changing is sometimes less than the pain of staying where people are. And oftentimes that pain point, you've already identified what are the most frequent issues. Oh, we're having so many issues with keeping our content management system secure and up to date. Maybe we have bottlenecks in publishing. Maybe our editors are not able to assign or publish the items that they need to. Or maybe something is a little bit outdated and doesn't look like a real 21st century modern website, right? There's all these pain points, and that's what's probably pushed your stakeholders into undergoing this very large and intense process, right? So during that planning process, go ahead and align the group, understand who the primary stakeholders are, who holds the budget for this process, who's an approver, who is somebody to be consulted, who is supporting, who is to be informed. Just coalesce around what your bullet points are. Some samples might be successful redesign might be as such fresh and modern and clean, mobile friendly, mobile responsive, easy, tabbable, accessible navigation, maybe a call to action, register to vote, or learn more, or contact your representative, right? Just something on every page. I've seen other constituting a successful design goals be, I need to be able to publish easily at the day of, because our election is happening and we need to publish the information today. Or we need to onboard and add new authors, right? So think about what works with your government. Redesign has many different stakeholders. And then the next is, what can you do? We have limited time, we have limited energy, we have limited capabilities in this first phase. So let's determine from the startup world, borrowing this idea of an MVP. What is the first iteration of the redesign that we feel comfortable interacting with and presenting to the public? So the way we would recommend is for you to really identify that long list of everything that people want, but then going through a sort order, a prioritization order, assigning a priority or other mechanism just to allow people to feel like they're a part of the process, and just get approval, clarity, and collaboration and consent about what constitutes your minimum viable product. And also work with your vendor, because they can give you insight in what comes with, again, as we know, some of our content management systems come with quite a lot, and or what might take a little more time. Okay, so without this prioritized list, it's possible that you might get in a cycle of just churn and churn and churn, where people narrow their focus on the one thing that they want. We really want upvoting. We really want to be able to do this or that. But what we need to understand is this is a 42 to 52 week project or a 60-week project. We really need to get that out the door. And so once you have that long list of stakeholders requests, assign them into our priority. This is just one way to do it. You could do card sort, you could do other types of prioritizations. Here's an example. Maybe we want to allow people to create blogs. That's number one. But maybe at a second part, we could use some other priorities. Maybe flagging an article as being approved. Maybe you need to have some sort of moderation process. That could be a priority too. Maybe you need to have scheduling. Sometimes there's scheduling related items. Publish this at this date, but then 3 months later unpublish it. Maybe that's a priority. I'm not sure, but once you determine what is number one, you can then work with your project to identify what you absolutely must have at launch. Okay, now we get into the meat. So Drupal, as some of you know, consists of many different types of content. So these are entities. And the most common are, say, items like pages, blog posts, press releases, events. Right? These should be some landing pages. These people pages. These are probably going to be very familiar to you. And then what we also want to do is understand the fields associated with each of that. So for example, if I was doing a press release, I might expect to know the date of publication, which may or may not be different from the date it was created, the location, maybe the city seat, maybe Washington, D.C., close to where we are. Potentially in a press release, you might need the body text and then maybe some sort of disclaimer text at the bottom. And sometimes a press release may have a link or it may have an image, right? So understanding what that all is. Then you're identifying which users are allowed to create, edit, and delete or unpublish that content. Okay, so it might look like staff member Jody may be able to submit a press release, but only the editor, Janice, can edit any of the available press releases. And then it might be that only items can come into the queue as an unpublished item. And then Ramesh, the department head, is the only one with the ability to publish. Determining all of this it's at your review and at your discretion, but this begins in the planning phase. And I encourage you to think about it as measure twice, cut once. The more time you spend on planning and building it out in your mind and blueprinting out all of these content types, these rules, and these permissions, it'll be so much easier during the build. Here's an example. Again, this is just an example, and I want you to think about it from your own perspective. But these are a sample of different content types that we might use, for example, in a website blog posts. Who's allowed to create, edit, and delete? Who's allowed to edit the department or the division language? Who can submit a contact form? In this case, we're saying anyone visiting the site can submit a contact form. They don't need to log in. There's in fact no need really to log in. Maybe if you allow comments or open review, then people would want to log in. They want to authenticate themselves. Some other options might be, right, a department head or staff or editor. All of these are a part of your initial planning process. Okay. As a side, we found that oftentimes humans, all of us, feel a little more better when we can categorize our information, right? So we can put them into buckets or categories, or maybe one item can go into 2 buckets. It might be related to voting and elections, or it might be related to water and electricity, or it might be related to press release, and also we want to dump this somewhere into the blog. So as you're identifying the list of categories or classifications, that is something that you can think about in the real world. So for example, an event, if I was running an event, it might be private, just to the people that I share it with. It might be public, which means it's public facing, anybody can attend. Potentially you may want to have something be requiring registration. You may have online or in person, right? So these are just different types of sorts or buckets that an event might go in. So as you determine these types of lists of categories, document them in the ongoing shared documents at your existing meeting that you have with the rest of the planning team. Circulate with the wider shareholders, clarify assumptions, and narrow down the details. Spec it out as much as possible. And again, here's an example pulled from our blog post about in the educational setting, for example. Yeah, does an event require payment? Is it private or is it public? Is it requiring pre-registration, etc.? So determine those lists of buckets. Sometimes I've seen them be topical: voting, pets, the environment, bill pay, how to contact your elected official. These might be potential categories that you can then bucket any of your content into. All right, so success, like how will I know? I know my grandfather used to say this: if we don't know where we've been, we don't know where we're going, and we don't know how we've gotten there. So again, what is the definition of success for this project? What is the aim of this website redesign? Determine that in advance. Write it down. As an example, it could be something like you're getting a directive from your stakeholders that pages might need to load in a quicker amount of time, or potentially you're asking for more people to register to vote or to register to receive notes from the website. Potentially you're looking for an increase in unique visitors to the site. Like whatever it is that your success metric is. I've also heard ones like reduction in time for publishing new content, or potentially just an improved workflow. So when somebody sorts by a particular help me category, they can find the correct department and then they can go and contact that person easily. So again, as government, we exist to serve our stakeholders and to help them find the information easily, more smoothly, more intuitively. Any and all of your metrics could be in place. Again, for example, in this, it might be, oh, we want it to be bold headings, easy to scan, ideally to migrate any of the content from our legacy CMS and move it into the site. Maybe we want to increase in mobile mobile responsiveness. Our graphics are blowing up. We need them to be more friendly and more easy to load. So whatever it is, just return back to your overall goals that you had from the very, very beginning, and then narrow down what constitutes success for the project. Okay, now we're getting into the RFP. This is always the fun part. When you're circulating that request for proposals, do reach out to either trusted providers or folks who are in your location or in your field of interest. Find an agency or a developer designer group that suits your needs. And inside that RFP or request for qualifications, you'll want to include all of the things we discussed: your overall goal, the potential timeline, a budget if you have one, what you constitute as the success metric, and if you have it at this point, a discussion about those content types, those user rules, those permissions, and those categories. So again, nothing needs to be finalized yet, but your intent with circulating the RFP is you want to find a trusted professional who can help you narrow the focus and actually deliver on this project. So they'll be a partner to you in this process. These are typical questions. I can also share a case study I wrote that adds an actual language from an RFP. These are some of the questions that you may want to ask. And again, in terms of university, substitute the department. So again, company and team, who's going to be working with our group? What type of experience do they have? Where are they best suited in this process? Are they the devs, or can they also do design? Can they also help the content strategy? What's a typical timeline for a project of this size and the budget? What type of project management is used, right? You want to have something that easily fits in with your existing setup. What types of security processes are in place, or accessibility? If you're doing migrating, you'll need to have a migration plan, some way to import and migrate all of the information from your external source and put it into the new source. And then, of course, is there any support, maintenance, and or hosting submissions? We have hosted on a variety of platforms, including AWS, Amazon, and Pantheon. When you're doing the review, I'm a big fan of having the same types of people review the people coming in and assign a pointing score, maybe 10 points for this, 10 points for the approach, 10 points for the team, whichever way you want to score the vendor submissions. It's always helpful to create a short list if you are attempting to sort through. If you can bring your vendor submissions from the big pool down to, 20 and then to 10 and then to 5, or 50 down to 8 and then to 4, whichever works. Just break down the process into different rounds, semi-finalist, finalist, and then maybe a final presentation-based review. So make sure that folks have a sense. For our organization, we do have people from all over the country and the world. So we work 100% distributed. And this is a sample team. We might have a senior technical architect, a senior developer, and account manager, as well as a designer, and that front-end developer. That might all be a good exercise to determine what types of people will interface with your people as well. So oftentimes there'll be somebody on your side who does design who can then work with somebody from the vendor side. So think of your vendor as a partner and an adjunct to a team who will do their best based on their knowledge and their understanding of the project to deliver that final website redesign inside your constraints. Okay, we're getting close. So when we're ready for the kickoff, we can set all the expectations and ensure a successful start at the kickoff. Again, this is after the review RFP process. You've identified your vendor, you have agreed to their timeline. This is the beginning point when your internal planning process now meshes with the build out process. Sign the agreements, do the statement of work, run through the deliverables. And for us, typically we do run an on-site for strategy, design, and development goals. But in this case, again, with the way things are, we may be doing this remotely. At the kickoff, you are introducing the key team members. You're identifying the process. Is it going to be Scrum? Is it going to be sync meetings? How are you going to figure out who the decision makers are and who has approval? And then what are the acceptance criteria for each phase? One great thing about content management systems and open source in general is we can always see an iterative working version of the site as it is. It might not look pretty, right? It may just have the header or a graphic, but the guts of it are usually the same. And we're talking about content types, different types of users being able to access content types and test against a development environment that it doesn't, nothing is permanent. You can test it, test your assumptions, and then go back to the drawing board. Now that we're in the work, we also need to have a plan for your migration. So, wow, some of the projects we've done have, or I've done, have had multiple sources, AEM, WordPress, Joomla, a number of others, Prismatic, Storefront, whatever the external pieces are, find a way to build in the migration pathways from that existing content to pre-populate your new version of it. So press release, like we mentioned, the date, the location, the scheduled date, the text, the link, making sure that's all coming over smoothly. And migrations, again, can also be prepped and tested. So just consider your resources, your budget, your timeline. Like that might be, the migrations might be addressed as a separate part of the work because there's always something. So oftentimes the migrations have to be considered from the beginning. How are you going to build that into your development schedule? And again, as I mentioned, for hosting, there's a number of direct kind of Drupal focused hosting platforms, but any of the items that you and your vendor can agree upon within the confines of procurement at the state or federal level or local level, whatever fits your needs, you can work with your vendor to determine. Ideally, you do have ways to have kind of enterprise workflow just for ongoing development, testing, and production. Just testing on the multi-dev environment and then releasing it to the test environment, QA, and then making sure that it goes to live. And friends, we are at tip 12, the scheduling of the actual build out. At this point, you are communicating with the project manager or your chosen vendor or between your web liaison and that project vendor. You are in touch as frequently as needed. Oftentimes there's scheduled sync meetings. There's brief check-ins. Again, as a Scrum Master, I do believe in that process of identifying the priorities during the initial planning session, going through the 2-week sprint, and then identifying daily what's happening with this stand-up. And then at the end, reviewing the process, reviewing the deliverables, kind of regrouping, re-inspecting, and then committing to the next sprint. You can use any tool, Jira, Bitbucket, Trello, Active Collab, Asana, whichever base you need to sort your code. We use GitHub as well. Just have a background and understanding with your chosen vendor on how they will manage the flow, the production flow, and how you can inspect incremental progress on the project. Now, oftentimes you'll be dealing with a legacy site and also concurrently supporting this new platform. So there's things that can be done at the domain level to switch. Maybe you'll be ready for a switch for cohort 1, which is 3 of the department websites, and that can go live in January, and then another three can go live in the middle of January, and then so on and so forth. So consider rolling out the process. And then again, there's always the iron triangle we call it: fast, cheap, or quality. Just pick two because you can't have it all three. So there's a balance between kind of speedy development, inexpensive costs, and high quality. And your team may just need to prioritize which two are the most important. Always insist on demos. We love to do the review at the end of the sprint. We can figure out incremental progress, because if you can get eyes and stakeholder review and feedback on an item quicker or earlier in the process, then when they're building it out, they're getting better and better information on what constitutes success for that incremental item. For the example of press release, is the sort order correct? Are we able to import that press release correctly? Are we able to create and edit press releases correctly? Do they display on the site in the right order? Can we elevate certain ones higher up in the page? And then the rest might be just a reverse chronological list, right? So you would want to be able to see that early in the process. Might not be pretty, but the guts of it, the underside, when it's working, you can be then assured that the chrome that gets put on top will be fine. All right, so I'd like to also encourage you to think about the feedback cycle. So one of the things that you do not want to implement in your process is having a fully built out website, right? Like old school, oh, here it's going to be ready in February. And the only time you see it is maybe January 31st. You don't want to do that. What you want to have is a very, very, very tight feedback cycle, so that every time something new that you have articulated and identified in terms of your content type, your user roles, your permissions, you can see it in action, you can view it, and you can use it for real with a real working site. So with a quicker feedback cycle, not only your website team that's working on the project, but also your existing stakeholders. It might be that you have stakeholders who are not as tech savvy or not feel as comfortable, but as long as they can also get eyes on something and give you feedback, you'll be assured of making the biggest effort to involve the greatest number of people, and make sure that at the end of the process, you've already integrated the feedback loop, right? So you've already asked people for approval and checking on the item prior to it coming available in February. You're getting it in November, you're getting it in December, you're getting it in January, right? So early, often, and more. And then another item that I would be remiss to mention is to always focus on accessibility. There's a number of accessibility requirements that I'm sure many of us are struggling with: how to make PDFs accessible, how to make sure we comply with 503 requirements, how we make sure that there's high contrast, how can we make sure that the site works for everybody who's using it. So whatever you can do to work with your vendor and follow guidelines, the better. Okay, so as mentioned, we are at 11:35. This concludes the presentation aspect of it. I do encourage you to think about what constitutes success, which you've already identified. But depending on the complexity of what you have, within 6 to 12 months, you'll have an updated, easy to use, editorially controlled mobile website that's attractive, that's friendly, and that encourages people to take advantage of government, and it makes a measurable difference for you and for your success. So I encourage you in this process, and I applaud all of you for the work you're doing to make sure that government is responsible to our people. All right, so we'll go ahead and stop share, and I will then be open to questions. Also, drop into the chat your own resources and your own identified checklists or any tools you use, and I'm happy to open it up for questions. Thank you, everyone. Here's the blog post. Oh, thanks, Brian. Here is the blog post. It's written again from the perspective of an EDU. And we also have other many articles on the Lullabot blog that helps you work through this process. As I mentioned, 2 hours of planning will save you an hour in the build. Okay, and Ali is informing me that there is a question in the Q&A. Okay, challenges. So Kieran says the challenges for me are stakeholders' involvement on sign-offs, acceptance criteria, prioritizing features for phased delivery. Could you speak on some best practices and tips? Absolutely. Kieran, that is the greatest issue. And I think in our experience, what it boils down to is people want to be involved. They want to make sure that their opinion is valued and respected, right? And so, in terms of approval, I would think that the people who are closer to the development, to the production process, you could think of them as a big group of your stakeholders. And then a secondary kind of market for that would be the people who are consuming that information. So, to go back to that earlier version of, say, press releases, are there stakeholders who are directly responsible for publishing press releases? If so, those are the ones who we would want to involve earlier in the process so that when they do a new, like they'll literally go to the website and say, add a new press release. Does the information come up in the way that they would expect? It has which department it's supposed to go to or which branch. It has a standard layout. Maybe there's picture uploader that they need to be able to just grab a photo from the pool of photos, and then date, description, WYSIWYG editors, right? So the stakeholders themselves who are responsible for creating this are one aspect. The second would be whoever represents the user voice in your organization. So somebody who's consuming that information, can they sort it? Can they understand it? So, for example, search might be a higher priority, and then search might be a workable search, may actually be a higher priority than a really beautiful, like very glossy approach. So, in terms of that iron triangle, quality and time and cost, I would say that your stakeholders, you would just roll it out in phases between the people who really need to produce and consume that information, making sure they check off. Somebody who's the department head, of course, they want it to look good. They want their name is going to be at the bottom of it, right? Or the department name is going to be at the bottom. But to some extent, the more we can go with a templatized approach with a really unified version, then all of the different departments will be using the same press release template. You will find stakeholder approval process to be a little more challenging towards the beginning of the project, but as it grows and takes on its own mass, then other groups will pretty much be more of a sign off, more of a checkbox. And I would do this both, I would not do this just on email because we have found that people tend to not understand it. I would actually set up review meetings. And again, the demos are good for that, or a separate review meeting, but grouping by priority the people who are going to be using this information and scheduling demos with them. And then that will be time for them to give the feedback, early feedback. And then again, informing them feedback cycle wise when you've made any changes that they've asked for. They might say, oh, we want, we might want WYSIWYG, or we might want 2 different sizes of images. So let them be involved early. Acceptance criteria, we do the user stories, and oftentimes that's helpful. So you can say, this is the business use case, and as a event manager, I need to be able to create an event. And then as a person signing up for events, I need to be able to easily easily attend or register an event. So that might be priority 1, but maybe for priority 2 or phase 2, right? Because this is an ongoing process. Then you might want to put, I also want to be able to add it to my Google Calendar or to my Outlook calendar, or I also need to be able to download the PDF from it. So whatever it is, again, focus on what you can deliver in smaller and tighter increments. And that speaks to your third question about the prioritizing features. I'm always big on the guts because maybe 15, 20% can cause sometimes the 80% of the churn, right? Because most people have an understanding. And I know at Lullabot we've worked on there's very standard content types that we are responsible for in government to sharing, right? You need to share, you are responsible in government. information with the public, timely news or features, press releases, papers, events, making sure that the landing pages themselves have the correct information, and then making sure that the people are updated. So that's your half a dozen content types. If you can understand that everything is a building block on that base, it will be easier for everybody. And again, what we found is in past experience, when you work with a core group of folks and roll out the things for them and try and identify what is the core, say, content type or the core way, then for subsequent participants, they might have a choice in layout or in design or theming, or no, we don't need the date field, we just need this field, right? But the core information, focusing on what the core is without losing too much functionality, is what you want to do for that MVP. I will look through what we have in terms of acceptance criteria and prioritized features. But yeah, this is also, I hear you, this can be fraught. This can be a fraught process, which is why pivoting back to your original documents and your original agreements is also helpful. I hope that answers it. Any other questions, please feel free to drop in the chat. And thanks everybody for joining me. I really appreciate you coming. You can contact me at monicadear. I'm online in all of the different channels, or on Drupal.org as monicadear, MONICADEAR. And yeah, I look forward to continuing to hear your questions. Oh, without the T. There we go. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great rest of the time at Drupal GovCon. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Have a good day. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm so in awe of what all of you are doing. So thank you so much. It's been now more than ever. We need your work. We value your work. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Again, this was 12 Steps for Successful Conversion at Drupal GovCon 2021. My name is Monica Flores, and I'm signing off. Have a great rest of the day.